You did everything right. You paid off the house. You killed the mortgage. You sat at that kitchen table the night the last payment cleared, and you felt something you had not felt in 30 years. You felt free. You thought, they cannot touch me now. Nobody can take this from me. You were wrong. And the cruelest part is that you were wrong in a way nobody warned you about, because the people who built this system never wanted you to understand the particular kind of trap you had just walked into. There is a word for what you have become. You have become house rich and cash poor. And that phrase sounds almost polite until you watch it work in real time. Until you watch a man who did every single thing right spend the last decade of his life rationing prescription medications because his net worth is sitting in 4 walls. When he cannot eat, the equity is there. The number looks good on paper, but paper does not pay for a new roof in February. Paper does not cover the property tax bill that went up 40% in 8 years. Paper does not sit next to you in the cardiologist's waiting room. And here is the part that should make your blood run cold. The system did not trap you here by accident. It trapped you here by design. Because a man, with all his wealth locked in a single illiquid asset, is a man who still needs someone. And a man who still needs someone can still be worked. The equity trap is the last leash, and most men spend their final years not even knowing they are wearing it. Let me tell you about a man named Roy. Roy spent 31 years as a civil engineer for a county government in the American Midwest. He was not flashy. He drove a 12-year-old pickup. He maintained himself. He packed his lunch 5 days a week for most of his career. He said no to the vacation timeshare presentation, no to the boat loan, no to the home equity line of credit his neighbor used to redo a kitchen that looked exactly the same 6 years later. Roy did everything by the old rules. Every raise he got, half went to the mortgage, half went to savings. When his pension vested, he did not touch it. When his kids left for college, he helped where he could and made sure they understood the value of what he was giving. By the time Roy was 64, he owned his house outright. A 3-bedroom ranch on a half-acre outside of Columbus, Ohio. He paid $61,000 for it in 1988, and the county assessor valued it at $312,000 the year he retired. Roy felt like a winner. Roy felt like he had beaten the system, and then his wife needed a hip replacement, and then the furnace went out in January, and then the property taxes on a $300,000 home in a county that had been discovering its own popularity climbed to $6,000 a year, and then Roy's pension, which had sounded generous when he signed for it in the 1990s, did not account for the cost of living in a world that had quietly repriced everything while he was working. Roy sat at his kitchen table at 2 a.m. with a yellow legal pad, and he wrote down every number he could think of: income, fixed costs, medical, maintenance, taxes. He ran the math 4 times. The 4th time, he stared at a number that told him he could not afford to live in the house he owned, free and clear. He could not afford to be a millionaire. What Roy experienced has a name, but the name does not get spoken at the financial planning seminars your employer offered you in the years before retirement. The name is the equity trap, and it is not a metaphor. It is a specific, engineered condition that emerged from decisions made by specific people in specific rooms over the past 70 years. Decisions that reshaped what home ownership meant in this country and in the United Kingdom. Decisions that turned the family home from a place to live into a financial instrument you happen to sleep in. To understand how you ended up here, You have to go back to a particular moment in American financial history, a moment most people have never heard of, even though it changed everything about how your net worth is structured right now, today. You have to go back to 1934, and a man named James Moffett, and a decision made inside the Federal Housing Administration that was not about housing at all. It was about debt. It was about creating a permanent class of borrowers, and 70 years later, it is still working exactly as designed, except now you are on the other side of it. James Moffett was a former oil executive from Standard Oil, appointed to help Roosevelt figure out how to restart the American housing market after the Great Depression had frozen it solid. Before the Federal Housing Administration, most mortgages in this country were short-term instruments. 5 years, 7 years. You paid interest, and then you paid off the principal in a balloon payment at the end. Banks did not love long-term exposure. Families did not carry decade-long debt as a matter of course. Then the FHA arrived, and it brought with it the 30-year amortizing mortgage, and everything changed. The pitch to American families was beautiful, affordable monthly payments. The dream of homeownership, finally, within reach. And it worked. It absolutely worked. Homeownership rates climbed from under 40% in the 1930s to nearly 65% by the 1960s. But what nobody told you, what nobody tells you even now, is what that 30-year mortgage actually was from the bank's perspective. It was not a tool for helping you own a home. It was a tool for keeping you a borrower for the maximum possible duration of your productive working life. Think about the math. When you take out a 30-year mortgage at any interest rate above 3%, you will pay more in interest over the life of that loan than you paid for the house itself. The bank does not just get a customer. The bank gets 30 years of your paycheck. The bank gets first claim on your income, before your grocery bill, before your children's shoes, before anything. The monthly payment, that beautiful, affordable monthly payment James Moffett made possible, is the leash. And the leash was designed to last exactly as long as it takes to trap a man inside the most expensive decision of his life with no practical way out. Here is why this matters to you right now, not as history, not as something that happened to other people in black and white photographs, but to you specifically, in your specific house, in whatever city you are sitting in right now. The system that James Moffett and the FHA installed in 1934 did not just create the 30-year mortgage. It created an entire cultural architecture around homeownership that convinced 2 generations of American and British men that the house was the investment, not stocks, not a business, not land in a rural area, bought cheaply and held. The house, the specific house you lived in, the house your children grew up in, the house with your memories in the walls. That house became the savings account, the retirement plan, the legacy, the entire financial identity of the working class and middle class male. And once the house became all those things, once it became irreplaceable and emotionally untouchable, something very clever happened. You stopped being able to think about it like an asset. You could not sell it without losing something that had nothing to do with money. And the people who designed this system understood that, because an asset you will not sell is not really an asset at all. It is just a number on paper that keeps you needing things from them. The mechanism is identical today. The names have changed, but the geometry of the trap has not moved an inch. The way the equity trap works mechanically is not complicated. It does not need to be. The best traps are always simple. You spend 30 years paying down a mortgage while the value of the underlying property rises. This feels like wealth accumulation, and in a narrow technical sense, it is. Your net worth on paper grows. But net worth on paper is not the same as financial independence. Financial independence requires liquidity. It requires the ability to convert wealth into income or into protection without destroying your living situation in the process. What the equity trap does is it concentrates your net worth into the least liquid asset class available to the average person, and it does so at exactly the wrong moment in your life. When you are young and working and have income, you have flexibility. If you need to move for a better salary, you can move. If the market turns, you have time to recover. But at 62 or 65 or 68, when the mortgage is finally gone or nearly gone, when the equity is at its highest, you have the least flexibility. You cannot afford to be wrong about the housing market. You cannot afford a 2-year crash at the moment you need to sell. You cannot afford to watch your property taxes climb another 30% in a desirable neighborhood because desirability turned out to be someone else's gain and your expense. You worked 30 years to build a fortress, and the fortress turned out to have no plumbing. You own it. You just cannot live in it the way you planned. And when you go to the bank and you ask about a reverse mortgage, about a home equity line of credit, about any of the tools that exist to convert that illiquid equity into something you can actually spend, you will discover something that Roy discovered sitting at that kitchen table at 2 a.m. The tools that exist to help you access your own equity all carry a cost. They all require giving something back to someone. The system that trapped the money in the house is the same system that sells you the ladder to climb out, and the ladder is never free. Now let me introduce you to a woman named Gwendolyn. And before you wonder why I am bringing a woman into a conversation with you, understand that Gwendolyn's situation is your situation, just wearing different clothes. Gwendolyn is 68 years old. She is a retired nurse from Birmingham, England. She spent 37 years working night shifts in an NHS hospital because night shifts paid slightly more and she needed every pound she could get. Her late husband was a machinist who died at 61 of a heart condition. The doctors caught 3 years too late, and when he died, he left behind a small life insurance payout and a house in a suburb of Birmingham that had appreciated significantly in the years before his death. Gwendolyn owns that house outright. She receives her state pension. She receives a small NHS pension that was calculated based on her salary in years when her salary was, by any honest accounting, an embarrassment for the work she was doing. Her total monthly income is slightly above £1,400. Her fixed costs, property maintenance, council tax, utilities, insurance, medication, run to just under £1,200. She has £200 a month for food, transportation, clothing, and anything that breaks. Gwendolyn's house is worth £480,000. Gwendolyn cannot afford a broken boiler. She cannot afford new gutters. She cannot afford the kind of home care she will eventually need without either selling the home or taking on debt she swore she would never carry again. The equity is there. The number is almost $500,000. But the $500,000 is locked inside walls she has to heat every winter, and the walls have started to need things she cannot afford to give them. This is not bad luck. This is the design. Gwendolyn did everything right. The system looked at everything she did right and said, "We have one more use for you. Sit in the asset. Decline slowly. Then give it to us when you are done needing it." But here is the part that nobody tells you. the part that changes the shape of everything you have just heard, the part that most people who find themselves inside this trap never discover until it is too late to use it. The equity trap only works if you accept its premise. The premise is that the house must remain the container for all your wealth. The premise is that accessing your equity is inherently a loss, a surrender, a concession to the system. That premise is manufactured. It was not always true. It is not necessarily true now. And the people who understand that, the people who figured out early enough that the goal was never to die with the biggest number on a property assessment, those people made different decisions. Not reckless decisions. Not risky decisions. Quiet, legal, deliberately boring decisions that the financial industry never had any incentive to explain to you, because the financial industry makes its money when your wealth stays illiquid and you come to them for help. There are legal tools, instruments that have existed for decades, mechanisms built into the tax code of both the United States and the United Kingdom that allow a man or a woman at or near retirement age to restructure the relationship between their home equity and their actual, spendable, livable income. These tools are not secret in the way that conspiratorial thinking means secret. They are secret in the way that anything is secret when nobody who benefits from your ignorance has any reason to teach it to you. A financial advisor who earns a commission on the products he sells you does not get paid to help you understand how to convert home equity into income without a product. The bank that holds your savings does not send you a pamphlet explaining the most efficient way to restructure your net worth so that you need fewer of their services. The system does not educate you toward your own sovereignty. It never has. And understanding that, really understanding that, changes the way you have to think about every decision that is still in front of you. Roy eventually talked to a fee-only financial planner, not a man who earned commissions, a man who charged by the hour and had no financial incentive to sell Roy anything. What Roy learned in 3 sessions shook him, not because it was complicated, but because it was so obvious in retrospect that he spent an entire afternoon feeling like a fool, and then spent another afternoon being furious that none of this had been mentioned to him in 30 years of doing everything right. What Roy learned was that the equity in his home was not a reward. It was an opportunity cost. Every dollar of his net worth sitting in that house was a dollar that could not generate income. It was a dollar that was, in fact, generating costs, property taxes, maintenance, insurance, the invisible toll that real property extracts from its owners every single year just for the privilege of continuing to own it. Roy's $312,000 house was costing him money every single month while it sat there appreciating on paper. And the appreciation meant nothing to Roy's daily life. Appreciation feeds nobody. Appreciation does not heat a house in January. Appreciation is a story you tell at a dinner party. Roy's situation, his specific financial situation, was one where the smartest move available to him was also the move that felt the most psychologically violent, the most like surrender, selling the house. Not because he was beaten, not because the system won, but because the house was the trap, and the only way out of the trap was to stop calling the trap home. Roy did not want to hear this. Gwendolyn did not want to hear this. You probably do not want to hear this right now, but the wanting or not wanting has nothing to do with whether it is true. Here is what financial sovereignty actually looks like at 65. It does not look like the house. It looks like income. It looks like a monthly cash flow that covers your costs without requiring you to ask anyone for anything. It looks like a balance that does not require a good property market to sustain your lifestyle. It looks like a situation where your credit score is irrelevant because you do not need credit. It looks like a situation where a broken boiler is an annoyance, not a crisis. Financial sovereignty at 65 is not a number on a property assessment. It is a number on a bank statement that replenishes itself every month without you having to do anything except remain alive. The home equity your generation was taught to accumulate is real wealth in theory. But wealth in theory is just a story, and a story cannot keep you warm, cannot pay your copay, cannot buy your grandchildren a birthday present without you doing arithmetic first to make sure you can afford it. The men and women who found their way through this trap, who are genuinely free in the way you always imagined you would be free by now, they are not the ones who died with the most equity. They are the ones who converted it. They are the ones who looked at the house not as a home that happened to have a financial value, but as a financial asset that happened to be a home, and they made decisions accordingly. That is a hard reframe. It is one of the hardest reframes available to someone who has spent 30 years building their identity around a particular piece of ground. But it is the reframe that separates the men who spend their final decade rationing medication from the men who spend it choosing how to use their time. The difference is not intelligence. It is not luck. It is whether you understood the game before the game was over. Roy eventually sold the house. He moved into a well-kept rental in a smaller town 20 miles east of Columbus. His monthly housing costs dropped by roughly $800. The proceeds from the house, after taxes and transaction costs, gave him a lump sum he invested in a combination of income-producing assets and a small annuity that added meaningfully to his monthly income. The number that used to sit in the walls of his house now sat in accounts that sent him checks. He still thought about the house for a while. He drove past it once about 6 months after the sale and sat in his truck for a few minutes. Then he drove to a diner, had a meal he did not calculate the cost of before ordering, and called his daughter. He did not tell her where he had just been. He just told her things were good, that he was doing all right, that for the first time in a long time he felt like the math was working in his direction instead of against him. Roy was not wealthy in the way the financial press uses that word. He was not going to buy a boat. He was not going to snowbird in Florida. But he was financially sovereign in the only way that matters at 65, which is to say, he was not afraid of the mail. The mortgage was gone. The property tax bill that climbed every year was someone else's problem. His credit score was irrelevant to his life. His income covered his costs. His savings had a job to do and were doing it. The system that had held him in the equity trap for the last decade of his working life no longer had anything on him. There was no debt to threaten. There was no balloon payment waiting. There was no lender with a claim on his future. He was, in the only real sense of the word, ungovernable. And that, more than any number on any assessment, is what they were trying to prevent. The equity trap survives on one thing and one thing only. It survives on the idea that the house and the home are the same thing. The house is a structure. A home is a feeling. You can take the feeling with you. The structure will stay behind regardless. Every man who dies with his equity intact, with his wealth locked in walls, his estate will sell at a price his heirs will argue about. Every one of those men spent the last years of his life protecting a number that never did a single thing for him. The house appreciated. The man inside it did not. The system wins when you confuse the container for the contents. The container was always just a container. The contents, the safety, the stability, the freedom to choose how you spend your remaining time, those are portable. Those can be extracted. Those can be converted into something that actually functions as freedom, rather than just resembling it from a distance. You are not too old to understand this. You are not too late to make a different decision. The question is not whether the trap exists. You can see the trap clearly now. The question is whether you are willing to call it what it is, even after all the years you spent believing it was a reward. Roy called it what it was. Gwendolyn is still deciding. The decision is yours. But the one thing that is no longer true is that you did not know. You know now. And a man who knows and does nothing has made his choice just as clearly as a man who acts. The house is not the prize. The life inside it is. And the life inside it deserves better than to be held hostage by the walls.